What we did earlier this year was to conduct a study on monetization of vision podcasts, and we found some really interesting facts out there.
Africa is still very virgin in terms of content, but can we build our own platforms and our own creators so that we have that power and advantage to ourselves as opposed to giving our birthright to everybody else as we have done in the past?
One of the facts is that the digital media industry in Uganda is projected to make $166 million this year. So when you talk about digital media, you're talking about your streaming platforms, your online gaming, the Disneys, the Netflixes.
If there's a strategy for the diaspora, people in Dubai, the UK and Germany are very interested in what's happening here, and they also want to contribute to what's happening in Uganda.
Welcome everybody to yet another webinar of our monthly webinar series at Agile Media Africa. Today's webinar is about podcasting, which is a new frontier in communications. I'm Aggie Patricia, your host, and I'm also the CEO at Agile Media Africa. And it's really my pleasure to moderate these conversations, to have people expound more on the topics that are quite difficult to comprehend, and then they are able to execute those in their businesses. Today we have podcasting for people to be able to reshape how they tell their stories and also create content around audio, distribute and engage with audiences. Today, we'll be looking at why it's becoming so influential today. Why are big brands having podcasts? Why are journalists having podcasts? So we'll begin by taking you into a closer look on how podcasting has evolved over the years. I have some notes why it's actually capturing the attention of audiences worldwide. There's a lot of people saying that there's a lot more podcasts. Everybody today is starting a podcast, but is that really true? Then we'll explore the significance in shaping the public discourse and also influencing consumer behavior, which is really essential today because brands are looking to connect authentically with their audiences. So it's a medium that we should pay attention to and then also tap into. I am so excited to be in the same conversation with very influential people in the podcast landscape in Uganda. We have Razia Athman, who is also a very seasoned podcaster with the Vision Group, one of the biggest media houses in Uganda. Felix Byaruhanga, who is a founder of the Tribe UG. He's part of the Uganda Podcasters Association. He recently hosted the Spotify for artists here with Spotify. Miss Kevin Kaija, the project manager at AfroMobile. If you don't know what AfroMobile is, you need to check it out on your app store and download that app. Finally, we'll have Miss Betty Kakyo, who is the marketing lead at Agile Media Africa. Before we let in the brilliant minds to share their insights, I would like to ask you a question. How far back do you remember podcasts starting out in Uganda? From where I stand, I remember people talking about podcasts 7 years ago, but they have been in existence for over 20 years, not as compared to books or any other medium. Whoever is saying that there's more podcasts, then they're not really telling the truth. Although they're growing at a fast rate compared to any other medium, I guess that's why they're also saying there's a lot more podcasts. They're being talked about just as other channels like email marketing, video marketing, social media. People are talking about it as much as people talked about radio. Podcasters, we take our allegiance from radio, and I would not shun upon radio because most of what we do probably is a fundamental of great radio. Podcasts are growing 10 times faster than radio and also the revenue, as we'll be seeing later on. I look quite different today, but that is me. I've been podcasting for close to 7 years now. If we look at the stats on the podcast revenue for the year 2022, it's old, but I really like to remind myself that these stats are not so different from where we are today. If you look at radio spend in the year of 2022 in America, it was over 12 billion at a growth rate of 5%. If you think about podcast revenue of 2023, it was at 3 billion, but a growth rate of 37%. So any business person, any podcaster you definitely pick out that there's something intriguing about this medium. If you use it to your own advantage, you could probably benefit from this growth. It is very clear that in some research that was carried out, there was growth of podcast listenership from 7% to 31% in the year 2023. There are facts about people who listen to podcasts for over 9 hours a week. Just from yourself, the people who are on this webinar, I guess you listen to more than one podcast a day. I don't know how long that could be, but I spend probably half of my morning listening to podcasts. We have seen that podcasts are significantly growing, and that shouldn't be undermined. The opportunities are immense, especially because of the digital transformation. And I'm excited to hear more about that from Kevin. There's a lot that technology has enabled people to do, and that does not exclude podcasts. There's a subscription model that we'll probably be listening to from Felix. People today are also licensing their content. That also goes to podcasters, just like it goes for artists.
Vision podcasts have grown over the last year very fast. We now have a total of over 100,000 downloads across the board. We do not just news podcasts, we do investigations, we do entertainment, we do our podcasts syndicated in 7 languages, the 6 main languages. We have Ateso, Luo, Lugbara, we have Runyankore, we have Runyoro, and we also have, of course, Uganda. The reason we do that is to try and give our clients, especially, the mileage that if we produce for you a podcast in English and it's a topic of interest, then we can convert that into 6 other languages. We give you a specific podcast in 7 languages. Also, not just for clients alone or advertisers, we are trying to interest the Ugandans in diaspora, such that if someone speaks, for example, Runyoro, and they're in the United Kingdom, they can listen to content from home in their very language. The audiences will connect very passionately with this kind of content. It hasn't been an easy journey. We've just started selling podcasts, and that's where our challenge has been mostly. How do we sustain the production of podcasts? Because to sustain the production of these podcasts, the company needs money. That money has started trickling in. It's coming in very slowly. It shows that there's a promise and there's potential in podcasting, especially for us who can offer that content that is sustainable and structured and very well produced, because we have editorial policies that we follow. We don't just wake up and talk about anything. We have to follow the editorial standards of New Vision. We also have the advantage, of course, of hosting our podcasts on our own space, that is the New Vision website, www.newvision.co.ug, and on the app, the Vision Digital Experience app. We'll enjoy all the other major podcasting platforms, including Spotify. I would like to hear from colleagues here what you think about the competing platforms. As New Vision, we are trying to say, if you want to listen to New Vision podcasts, come to the New Vision website or the Vision Digital Experience app. In the near future, maybe 2-3 years, all our podcasts should be strictly on our website and not anywhere else. It had been a really huge debate to get our podcasts on the other major podcasting platforms. Locally, there are other podcasting platforms that also don't feel very comfortable hosting New Vision podcasts. The other interesting thing also from the side of podcasting as a media house, the African Center for Media Excellence recently started recognizing podcasting as its own unit. And in this year's awards, they actually shortlisted 3 of New Vision podcasts. It was a small percentage, but podcasts were recognized. And that shows that even in the industry out there, podcasts are taking shape and they're taking their space in the media industry. In terms of listenership, I think podcasting offers depth into topics. It gives the audiences an alternative to how they consume their media content. Because every time you are either watching TV, you're reading an article, maybe on your phone, or you are reading a newspaper, or you're listening to radio. But with podcasting, you can listen to your content anytime and anywhere without any pressure that, if I don't listen to this content right now, I will miss it. The other important thing, it offers that kind of fresh new feel. If you study some of our topics as a vision podcast, you'll realize that, yes, we might lean towards the topical issues, current affairs, but we give it a fresh or a unique perspective, just to make sure that we are not feeding our audiences with monotonous content. There's also that aspect of freshness. But this audience is still growing, and I feel that there's potential. It's an advantage already for us that in Uganda, the most widely consumed content is from radio. So there's already a link there and a direct advantage. It means we're already used to listening to radio. Of course, podcasting offers now the visual fast podcast, but we need also to think about how we can reach someone in a village, maybe in Karamoja, who is using the USSD phone. How can we get them to enjoy podcasts as well if they don't have an option of tuning into a radio? We need to also think about how to take advantage of those audiences who mostly listen to radio. How can we get them to listen to our podcasts on their low-end phones, not necessarily smartphones?
We hoped to hear more about the role of analytics. You talked about how you're trying to monetize now. Are the backend stats informing your decision based off of that data? Then I realize now you're broadening the conversation from just the news bulletins through the radio, expanding more on the radio stories to the podcast. I've had a lot of stories about Kalangala, which is quite impressive. Is that even effective through the podcast? Then also the niche targeting, because the media house has quite a broad range of an audience. Is that in any way guiding your audience of the podcast, or have you figured that out yet?
What we did earlier this year was to conduct a study on monetization of vision podcasts, and we found some really interesting facts out there. First of all, the fact that most people are not listening to podcasts simply because they don't know about podcasts. If they knew about podcasts, they would listen to podcasts. And comparing vision group audiences in general, talk about the TV, the newspaper, the radio. We took all of them and we're asking them whether you listen to podcasts generally, not necessarily the New Vision podcasts. 40 to 50% actually listen to podcasts, but they're not listening to New Vision podcasts. What we are working towards is to make sure that a vision group content consumer who wants to enjoy a podcast, then they have to enjoy New Vision podcasts, because we are offering them that alternative. As a media group, we've offered people from newspaper, now you can enjoy radio. From radio, now you can actually enjoy TV. From TV, you can enjoy content on the website. And now we're saying, from the website, you can actually now enjoy podcasts.
Good evening, everyone. Hello, everyone. Wherever you're watching from or listening from. It's really an honor to be part of this incredible panel. I just realized that I'm the only gentleman on this panel. Kudos to you, Agi, for making sure there is good representation on the female side. My name is Felix Byaruhanga. I'm the team leader and co-founder of Skyline Media and Management Limited. We're a creative agency and a team of creative industrialists. What that means is that we pretty much monetize creativity. Under Skyline Media, we produce 3 podcasts. That is the TribeG podcast, which is our in-house podcast. We also produce the Live It Up podcast for Uganda Child Cancer Foundation and the Ugandan podcast for Ministry of ICT and National Guidance. We've been part of the podcasting industry for the past 4 years, trying to evolve what the Tribe UG does, because we started as a blog in a board lecture, and along the way we've developed different properties. And in these 4 years, we've managed to put out over 40 episodes of the Tribe UG podcast. We've managed to produce a podcast for people in the NGO sector and people in the government sector. The Tribe UG podcast has managed to get a feature on CNN inside Africa. It has managed to get a nomination in the APVA Awards. That is the Africa Podcast and Voicing Awards. We are keeping on building and pushing and making sure that we are part of a progressive industry. Along the journey, we've encountered some challenges. One of them is the infrastructure. There's a time we're recording the podcast, and towards the end of it all, an electric pole tree fell into the wires outside. And just before we could say goodbye to everyone who was listening in or who was going to listen in, we lost all the audio because we hadn't saved, though we're recording. That is one of the examples where we've faced some major challenges due to the infrastructure that is around us, especially when you're trying to record. We face high internet prices. If anyone is listening in from one of the telecom companies, please, hi, how are you? Try to make things cheaper. But at the same time, we do believe that the internet will be getting cheaper and cheaper as technology advances and the purchasing power of Ugandans also grows. Those are some of the few challenges we faced. What we try to make sure is that we learn from those challenges, we apply, and we see how to change things. The other thing we've learned along the way is that you have to stay consistent in producing your podcast. We normally do 10 episodes a season, and after those 10 episodes, we go on a break. But the moment we come back, we realize there is a dip in the numbers because you close the season on a high. As you're trying to jump back into things, episode one, there is always a struggle. We've learned that you have to stay consistent with your output in terms of the podcast. We've also learned that it's super important for us is diversity. As I started on this call, I had to make sure I acknowledge the diversity that we have on the panel, making sure there is female representation. When we started the Tribe UG podcast, we used to be 4 guys on the podcast, but along the way, we're like, no, this has to change. We got a lady on, and we got feedback from the listeners, and they were like, hey, this is the best decision you've done ever since you started the podcast. She's called Razia. Along the way, like this season, when it was starting episode 1, we thought it would be great if all of us, the guys, go off and we let Damzi host an episode, and also she has an all-female guest cast. That episode has Afsa from Blankets and Wine. It has Sima, who is a media personality, and Damzi. It is one of our most listened to and most watched episodes. We realized through doing that not only is representation important, but then also having people tell their own story from their own perspective is really important, especially on the women's side of things. I may talk about a problem within the industry, but I'm limited talking about it from my perspective as a gentleman. When you have a female listener who is listening to a female panelist addressing this problem and talking about it, it's totally different. It gives it a wider reach. The other thing we've realized that is important in our industry is collaboration. That's one of the reasons why we are part of the Podcasters Association, so that we can learn from other people, collaborate with other people, find better ways of dealing with the challenges that we face. One of the things that we have to look out for as podcasters when creating authentic content is we have to understand our audience in terms of what are they looking out to listen, what are their listening habits, how often do they listen to this podcast, when do they listen to this podcast, what stories are they looking to hear, and how are they looking to hear these stories. When we started the podcast, we were pretty much audio alone. As we got demand from the listeners we had, because of the way the podcast is structured, there was a demand for video. We added a video. Now we are an audio-video podcast, and it's something we've tried to push onto even with other clients that we produce podcasts for. In terms of putting out authentic content, we try to make sure that whatever piece of content we put out, it contributes to building a brand that is the Tribe UG, which is a big brand. And then under it, you have different components, the Tribe UG podcast, the Tribe UG press play, the Tribe UG digital magazine. In a way, if you think about it, it's what Razia is doing with the New Vision podcast. She's going to put out an episode of the podcast, but at the end of the day, it has to contribute to the overall brand that is New Vision. It's what Agile Media is doing with these monthly sessions. At the end of the day, it has to contribute to the overall brand that you guys are trying to build and anyone is trying to build. You have to be transparent with the audience. As we've been open about the challenges that we face on the podcast, losing a podcast and having to call our guests back to record. That's one of the challenges that we've been open with. We've been open the audience when we missed a week where we didn't record, and we had to be honest that we weren't able to record because of MBCD. What we found out is that when you meet the listeners at the event, they relate to most of our challenges, they relate to most of our stories. We found that when you're transparent and honest with them, you connect a bit with them more. The other thing that will help tell authentic stories in the podcast sector is doing stories that are relevant to the Ugandan sector, to the Ugandan audience. I remember Razia's podcast, especially the one she does on Twitter. Most of them, they are relevant to the Ugandan sector, especially when you look at what happens during the week. If there is a Chitezi incident, she's going to rally up a panel that can speak to that particular scenario. So you find that the more you concentrate on more local relevant stories and local relevant scenarios, you are able to tell authentic stories and you're able to connect with the audience in a more deeper way. I think all of us, we are interested in, even myself, is podcast monetization. Podcasting monetization is an interesting thing. We've been studying it on our own. I'm going to start off by addressing what Razia said when she asked, what do we think about having our own platforms? First of all, I'm a strong believer in owning our own platforms. When you own your own platform, you get to dictate how this platform works and how this platform puts out content. You get to dictate in a way you want and in a way that caters for your audience as yourself to make sure it works for yourself. So I'm going to start off with a few interesting facts. One of the facts is that the digital media industry in Uganda is projected to make $166 million this year. So when you talk about digital media, you're talking about your streaming platforms, your online gaming, the Disneys, the Netflixes. Out of that, the video on demand segment is projected to make $83 million. I believe people who put out audiovisual podcasts, this is where we fall.
Yeah.
Because you are putting out video content. So the question is, how do we tap into this and how do we make sure that we are part of this? If anyone is interested, these statistics are on Statista. You can check them out.
Yeah.
Again, to monetization, there is an interesting fact that 67% of podcast listeners, they perceive ads positively. That is in comparison to other media platforms and other forms of advertising.
Right.
Which makes the adverts on podcasts ideal for brands and people of that nature. Furthermore, 54% of podcast fans are more likely to consider buying from a brand once they hear it on a podcast. It gives it that authenticity, it gives that stamp of approval. 81% of the listeners are likely to take action after listening to an ad on a podcast. That means I'm going to search about the product. I'm going to go on a brand social media and connect with them. I either follow them or check out the products they have. 75% of listeners are guaranteed to give a podcast their full attention. So in most cases, most of us, we are watching something on a laptop, we're watching something on a TV, but at the same time, we are scrolling on our phone.
Kevin is very pivotal in this conversation because they are AfroMobile, which she heads, and is a content aggregator, and they support creators with hosting their platforms and distributing them globally. I was very impressed to have had someone ask me about AfroMobile in a European country. Kevin, welcome to the webinar. Please share with us the role of digital platforms, especially in podcast distribution, and whatever else you have to share with us. Welcome, Kevin.
Hi, Aggie. Hi, everybody else on the call, the previous speakers. Those were such beautiful insights, Razia and Felix. For us as AfroMobile, our role is really to do distribution for content across board, from broadcast content, which is television and radio, to publications, which is ideally what other people would call newspapers, to music, to podcasts. But we are very passionate about podcasts because we know that there is a whole new wave of engagement with podcasting communication, because we've learned that the vulnerability in the space in terms of conversations draws a lot more people there to just want to listen to authentic conversations, as opposed to TV interviews or radio interviews where scripts are drawn and it's almost as if people are put at gunpoint to get answers to questions. The podcasting area is a bit more welcoming compared to all of the other forms of communication. We have learned that a lot of people are embracing it, whether through audio or visual. And yes, I agree with Razia that a lot of people are actually not aware they're consuming podcasts because they are watching them. Their assumption is that podcasts must be audio, but yet it is also true that most of the podcasts that are hitting the ground running and are doing amazing are mostly the visual podcasts. In terms of what we do at AfroMobile as a digital platform, is one to provide a robust platform where people can place their content. But beyond that, we also do cross promotion because we know that a lot of these individual content creators or creators who are doing podcasting might not necessarily have such a strong brand equity, but their affiliation to bigger brands. And I don't say this for AfroMobile alone. I'm sure for anybody that is producing a private podcast that goes ahead to collaborate with Vision Group for the Vision digital experience has got more value than if they decided to create a platform of their own, because one, it's going to be expensive to put in place the infrastructure. Two, it's also a bit more hectic to promote on your own. But when you tap into an already existing brand that has established itself to do this kind of work, it's easier even when they cross promote. We have a wide range of podcasts on AfroMobile. We have a lot of content from the BBC, who are our partners, but we also have podcasts on travel. We have Nile Post updates. That's just a continuation of the Nile Post publication. We have sport. We have entertainment. Beyond the cross promotion, which we do across our broad spectrum of digital platforms like Twitter and social media, because then it's easy for these content owners to tap into the numbers. If, for instance, Next Media brands like NBS put out a post about a particular podcast that we are hosting on AfroMobile, the platform, say Twitter, has about 2 million people. It is easy for that podcaster to tap into those numbers and draw some audiences out of them. I saw that Razia asked something in the comment section about partnerships. I believe that we are in an era of collaborations as opposed to competition. It is better for us to work together to drive agendas and narratives, especially for the African market. For me, I'm very passionate about homegrown brands because I've understood that, yes, the global north and everybody else, they give us platforms, but I don't think that they're as enthusiastic as we are in being patient enough, wait to see us grow, to wait to see us hit the miles and get to that place where they can celebrate us. But yet the homegrown brands like AfroMobile and Vision Group Experience are able to grow with you, to allow you room to just continue with you until you can get to that place where you want to be. I believe in collaboration a lot. We need to work with independent producers, even hosts, to make sure that this business grows. As a digital platform, we also provide organic data. And because when you look at our research from the traditional research companies, even when they're doing sampling, they will averagely sample, say, 100 people in Masaka. And many times you are left conflicted. Everybody is number one. Everybody is leading in something. It's as though the data is not making sense anymore. What the digital platforms and OTT platforms like AfroMobile do is they give you organic data. And once you're a partner with us, you're able to access your independent backend. So you're able then to see how many people listen to what kind of podcasts that you post there. If what is working, and you get into now the deep dive and understand why is it working. Are people more interested in this kinds of topic? Could it have been this particular guest? Can I try bringing them again and see if they'll give me the same level of impact? Is it the topics? Do I need to delve into parenting a bit more? Because the data is there and it's organic and it's accessible and you get proper real-time insights to help you improve your curating of this content. On top of that, as AfroMobile, we also do revenue share with our content creators, which obviously is such a good bonus, given the fact that content is very expensive to produce. I don't care whether it's broadcast or print or podcasts or music. Content in general is really expensive to produce. So it only makes sense that we support these growing creators in the podcast space once we make revenue there. And even the revenue that we are meant to share with them is based off of a formula that we share with you, and you're able to track on your own and say, you know what, I didn't make this much money this month because not so much people came in to listen to me. The content did not create as much impact as possible. Can I dig up this data and just get as much insight as possible to improve and then be able to make more money? We also allow you to advertise within your content, and then we'll just do a revenue share, obviously, because as platform owners, we also have bills to pay and systems to maintain to make sure that the system is robust and that it gives the users the value that they should get from it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kevin. What's good to highlight would be that AfroMobile is a part of the Next Media, also one of the biggest media houses in the country. All you need to do is share your RSS feed to the AfroMobile team so they're able to host you, like Kevin was mentioning. As Betty comes in with the key takeaways from the speakers, all of you was sort of bouncing off of each other's energy. Kevin has talked about a study that you carried out, and Razia ended with a study. Kevin talked about collaborations, and so did Felix, as Betty gets into her takeaways. So Betty, can you come in?
Hi, everyone. Just going back to what Felix was saying about infrastructure. This issue about infrastructure has been a major problem with content creators, not just podcasters, but content creators across various platforms like YouTube and TikTok, especially with issues such as internet and infrastructure as well. Earlier this year, there was hope that Starlink by Elon Musk was going to come into the market, and we were all hoping that it was going to disrupt some of these problems that we're facing with internet. That's like a hope for a lot of content creators right now. We're hoping to see a lot of disruption this year, especially with Starlink coming into the market. In terms of what Raz was saying about Vision Group's podcast, there's a lot of interest. We have about 2 million Ugandans living in the diaspora. My biggest takeaway from what Raz was saying is that the Vision Group podcast has a lot of potential to be one of the lead news distributors for diasporans, the Ugandan diasporans who are looking for Ugandan news. But right now, the only gap that is filling this need is YouTube. If there's a strategy for the diasporans, people in Dubai, the UK and Germany are very interested in what's happening here, and they also want to contribute to what's happening in Uganda. This is a very good initiative to get Ugandans living outside of Uganda involved in the current affairs of what's happening back home. In addition to what Kevin was saying, she brought together what Felix's concerns about infrastructure. When I open the iPhone podcast app, the first thing you'll notice is that they push their content, they push American, they push Western content, like African content creators who are pushing their content. They won't be priority on their algorithm. Providing platforms like AfroMobile is not just for Ugandans, given Africans, if there's an expansion strategy, just to push our content to the top and have it prioritized. AfroMobile is going to just be very important in the value chain of creators, especially in Uganda. It's not just as easy as someone saying they want to start content. There are so many barriers in place, from what Felix was saying about internet prices to equipment. AfroMobile coming into filling that gap with support was really needed, and it came at the right time. I actually can't wait to see the growth that it will have, not just in Uganda, but also across Africa, in terms of just removing barriers and creating employment opportunities for a lot of young people who want to create content. This is one of the podcasts, just bringing the topic back to the theme about podcasting and communications. One of the podcasts I've been following a lot was the Safaricom podcast that they created. It's one of the biggest in the region. This is obviously a corporate company that integrated podcasting into their communication strategy. And everyone knows Safaricom is a leading player in tech, finance, and innovation. But I love how their communications department, they launched this podcast in 2021, and their whole point was just to engage their audience and obviously deepen their impact in the community. They share stories. There's a way they share these stories authentically. They also merge the products and services that Safaricom offers. So they'll do a podcast on financial inclusion, and they'll offer the solution back to M-Pesa. They'll do a podcast on AI, but still promoting their own products in Safaricom. In terms of a case study that I've seen across East Africa that has incorporated their corporate strategy and the podcast in terms of communication well, is the Safaricom podcast. And if anyone has time, they can check it out, especially for communicators who want to integrate these strategies together, how podcasting can help their overall communication strategy.
Thank you so much, Betty. And just to go back to the same, we have such intertwining thoughts that if we bring our heads together, especially in such a virgin industry, we can be able to make so much out of it. I definitely agree with them. I would love to see us come together to have, say, a report on content consumption in Uganda from all the big media houses coming together to bring down stats and data that will help us as an industry show proof of the medium for it to be recognized more. Just to go back to the questions, in just a few minutes, it would be nice just to hear from you some parting words. Rathman, you were talking about the study. Before I cut you short, Felix, you were giving us more stats into podcast listenership, which was great. Kevin, it would be nice to give us a sum.
One of the other important things I wanted to mention was the development of talent, and as far as podcasting is concerned, not just talent in the newsroom, but also for individuals. I know there are already efforts to train casters, having some camps, and I really wish and pray that we can develop that. One of our biggest challenges at New Vision is to call the journalists into podcasters, to give them the ability, to enable them expand their stories with podcast. If you're writing 1,000 words for a story, how can you expand that? Maybe do 3,000 words and even use more elements in terms of sound and how you play around with the imagination of the audiences. That is important aspect for us, especially as Vision Group. And in the nature of our work, we have a pool of content, but we need people to be able to produce this content into podcasts and also to appreciate it. I also had what Betty mentioned. Thank you so much for pointing out the idea of incorporating podcasts into the communication strategy of a company. I think podcasts should replace newsletters. Yes, newsletters are still being used, but I think pod can do very well. And I'll personally check out these Safaricom podcasts. Felix mentioned we'll have money and the opportunity to generate revenue through podcasts. There are $166 million that will be projected this year in Uganda. That's a lot of money. And if podcasts can enjoy just a small share from that, it would be wonderful. Because even at Vision Group, I can tell you there's a very small percentage of revenue that is coming from the website or online content. And we're still working very hard to make sure we can earn more money through online platforms. In terms of platforms and collaboration, just to go back to what Kevin mentioned, it's fantastic that AfroMobile is giving an opportunity to young and upcoming podcasters and also enabling them to make money. That kind of provides the stability that is much needed for one to be consistent with their content.
Thank you so much, Razia.
Thanks for having me.
I'm a fan of all of you people and all the work you do. Those are my parting shots. I want to close it with a small story. I'm going to be as brief as possible. Back when social media had come along and Beyonce had this one particular person called Dr. Marcus to move her audience from being offline to online. And what the person did, they came up with a new thing called Bien Trash. They launched it and then no one showed up to the launch of it. They went back, they went to every corner of the internet, and then they landed on a community calling itself the Beehive. They had their own language, they had their own way of speaking, and they were all Beyonce fans, and they all believed in Beyonce fans. They took that and then they adopted that as the official Beyonce fan club. The goal was that it became so clear to them that you don't grow communities, but you facilitate the growth of communities. I believe that's what all of us podcasts are doing. We are facilitating the growth of communities. Razia just asked about the Podcast Association. The AGI has been doing that in terms of facilitating the growth of the community. And with facilitating the growth of the community, you are going to put yourself out there and you say, hey guys, these are my values. I believe in ABCD. People who believe in those values are going to surround you and rally behind you and continue pushing. I say this to say that any podcaster out there watching, let's continue facilitating the growth of communities, because it's only through these communities that we can then monetize and sell sponsorship against them. We can sell merchandise to them. We can organize live events and people can buy tickets and attend these events that we are doing. That's the easiest way we can monetize our audience. That's the easiest way we can monetize our community and our podcasts. Thank you. Like I said, I'm a fan of all of you guys. Keep creating, keep working. As the tribe Skyline, we are dedicated to collaborate with all of you. Let's get this $166 million.
I would like to know if the $166 is for artists or podcasts.
It's for digital media.
Wonderful. We had that from Felix. Now it would be nice to hear from Kevin, your parting words.
My parting shots really to Razia mostly, as somebody that is playing in the same space where they own a digital platform, an OTT platform. I think let us encourage people more to embrace this platform so we can grow homegrown brands, platforms that identify with our people, with their stories, that care about the African market, so that people have options, because we have lived in an era and a generation where everybody's dying to go to Spotify and Netflix for visual content creators and all of the others at play. I'm very passionate about building platforms in Africa for Africa, because that's how we support our people. We understand their problems better. We know our demographics better. We know the challenges. We understand where the opportunities are. And yet everybody else is coming down here to try and pick the African story. I could be wrong, but I believe the West has run out of stories to tell. They've done everything and they almost are replicating it every other day. So Africa is still very virgin in terms of content, but can we build our own platforms and our own creators so that we have that power and advantage to ourselves, as opposed to giving away our birthright to everybody else as we have done in the past?
Wonderful. That was brilliant, Kevin. In Africa for Africa, there's a saying that everyone has a plan for Africa except the Africans. So thank you for that, Kevin. Betty?
I'm just excited for our community just continuing this conversation. I know our community can think about involving the Ministry of ICT in addressing concerns like high internet costs, so giving people more infrastructure, supporting the podcast community, so that we have more young people coming into this space. A lot of young people, they understand these things, but they just have barriers entering them.
Wonderful. To everybody, to each one of you who made time this evening, thank you so much. Your insights are very valuable, and I hope that the listener is able to take a thing or two that can help them probably grow in podcasting, or an investor who wants to understand the industry, especially here in Uganda, and for you, dear experts in your own right, that you've learned a thing or two from one another. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much, Aggie, and we hope we can have this conversation again soon.